Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Cranked and Ranked. Today it's kind of a little bit of a different kind of episode. Sure, we're going to be ranking shit as usual, but we're going to be talking about our favorite albums from a specific year. And the year that we are going for is 1989. Before we get into that, Quick introductions. I'm Steven, Old Head, YouTube channel. Over here we have Eddie Sparxx, also from his own YouTube channel. He's pointing, but you can't see him pointing. But yeah, we're here and we rank rock and metal related shit. If you've been listening, we've been doing bands, discographies, but today we are doing our top 5 favorite albums from 1989. So without further ado, as we normally do, I just said do twice, I'm going to let Mr. Eddie Sparxx take the first, I guess the number 5, although you're not doing yours in any particular order, correct?
The albums that I picked are all from like their own kind of area, genre-wise, so I couldn't fairly rank them in terms of quality because they're all so different. So mine is in no particular order, but yours is.
I stressed myself the fuck out, not only because 1989 was a great year for music, so the fact that we narrowed this down to a top 5 was a fucking nightmare for me. And then I tried to order things in a top 5, which I'm okay with this order, so I'm just going to go with it. But from my point of view, there was a lot of great music and a lot of albums that I didn't get to include. And also, like, I really decided that I needed to go with how I feel. Like, this is a very feeling kind of episode because I couldn't get incredibly technical because some of these albums, most of them have lived with me since 1989 and they are a part of my life. So, it's going to be one of those touchy-feely kind of episodes, folks. So, take it away, Eddie.
Cool. Just before I kind of start as well, I want to say that I usually in these episodes bring more of a track-by-track kind of thing. Here, I'm going to kind of steer away from that, solely based on the fact that I don't want to give everything away for a certain album in these episodes, so that I've got more to elaborate on in a specific band's Cranked and Ranked episode. So I'm just going to go the same route as Steve here and go for a more vibe-oriented thing. But yeah, don't worry, my track-by-tracks are going to remain a mainstay in the band ones.
And I'm sure there's going to be enough diverging from the actual albums in this episode that you'll get your money's worth, folks, for your free podcast's worth. All right. Anyway, enough of my rambling.
No worries, man. Right. Cool. So my number 5 is "Practice What You Preach" by Testament.
Yes.
"Practice What You Preach" is such a good fucking late 80s thrash album.
Absolutely.
The production on it is much tighter than the previous two, but in like the best of ways. You can tell the band are progressing as musicians, and this, at least for me, the first half of this record, side A, it really is an exercise in how to write metal that is heavy, but also are complete earworms. They're really catchy songs at the same time.
Totally.
Because say for example, we touched on Slayer with the last few episodes. Slayer has memorable parts, but they're not like I would hazard a guess, like there's parts that are catchy, but for the most part, Slayer like play off of the whole kind of thing.
Yeah, and we talked about how
you're
the catchy parts for Slayer are usually the riffs and not a vocal part.
yeah. But this here, like one that always gets stuck in my head is "Time is coming."
Yeah.
But like it, I feel like Testament strike this middle ground between like the hookiness of Metallica with the more extreme end of the spectrum without veering into it so much that it just becomes like Slayer, for example. So I did remember a friend of mine said something along the lines of Testament is what Metallica would sound like if they were like more virtuosic on their instruments. Like I love Metallica,
And if
but
they
I
stuck
do
with being thrash. Like that's the thing about Testament is they stuck with the thrash metal sound for the majority of their albums.
Yes, exactly. You know, let's have a look at the track listing here. You know, you got Practice What You Preach, the title track, Perilous Nation, Envy Life.
Yes. There's a lot of great songs on this album.
I even like the ballad, you know.
Yeah.
I love that, like, I love the, you know, tongue-in-cheek title of that song because, like, it isn't the story of that, you know, that they apparently the record label said that they had to have kind of a ballady track or something, or am I just, you know, remembering a fake
I've never
story?
heard that, but it could pretty well be true. But the fact that I guess this was on a major, although still kind of under the Megaforce umbrella or whatever. But I don't know. I've never heard that, but it would make sense. But yeah, I don't know. It's still a fucking great song. I mean, it doesn't strike me as any different than like Fade to Black from Metallica. It's just one of those things where a band does a different vibe in that particular song, and I think they did it really well.
Definitely. And I think as well it's important for me to note at least, my introduction to Testament was The Legacy. That first album to me was what Testament sounded like, and I thought, oh, this is really cool. Proper, like, kind of muddy, weirdly produced 80s mix, but the guitars were there, and it was like this kind of coordinated, not messy, but wall of sound. And throughout the first three albums, you can distinctly hear the production getting clearer, because, you know, The Legacy, brilliant album, don't get me wrong, but, you know, the difference it makes in just like 2 years. And the album that they did between it as well, The New Order, is like a mixture of both. But this album, it really has this tight, almost, I don't want to say And Justice for All, but you can definitely hear a distinct clickiness to the drums and a more pronounced, you know, this is kind of like what And Justice for All could have been. Like, you can actually hear the bass on this album.
Yeah.
But, you know, maybe that's just me remembering it weird again. But
this is actually the first Testament album that I heard.
Really?
So, in fact, my introduction to them was the song Greenhouse Effect off of this album, which I fucking love that song. But I believe I saw the music video for that. It may have been on Headbangers Ball. I don't really remember how I saw it, but it was around 89 or 90 when I saw that. And so this is my favorite Testament album. I did a Testament album ranking video a few months back or something like that. And this was my number one because I think when it comes to the music that they did, especially in the 80s and early 90s, I think this is the best. It's the most concise and well-written statement that they put out there.
Yeah, I would echo that statement. This is, what is it about thrash metal bands and their third album that just, you know, really hits the mark?
Well, there's also,
you know?
it's also just one of those things. I feel like all these bands, not only did they get better at doing what they were doing, but as the 80s moved on, production got better. You had producers who knew what they were doing. It's sure in some cases, maybe even in this album, people nowadays could look back and say the production sounds very dated, but I don't ever, that doesn't ever do anything for me because that it's a character of the album that's been there since I first heard it. And that's how I want it to sound. So, you know, but yeah, I love this album.
Yeah, I would go as far as to say, a lot of old thrash metal albums benefit from their production because it sounds rawer. And I find with a lot of modern metal, I had this discussion with my friend actually recently, the same one that said the thing about Metallica. He he mentioned how he listens to a lot of like modern metal. He didn't notice it until I brought it up. I said, like, you know so many bands, but you only know select songs. And he was like, yeah, I've never really been like a sit down and listen to a whole album guy. And I recommended he like start sitting down and listening to certain records that I give him. And he's begun to notice how he and I both have been noticing how modern production is very reliant on being right there in your face, whereas a lot of these older albums kind of play around more with the space of the song. And, obviously modern metal nowadays is very low end heavy. So it's going to be very punchy and bouncy and in your face. But I think that a lot of bands could really benefit from taking note from some of these albums and what gives them their unique characteristics, because that's something as well that I've found with modern metal that it does kind of blend together for me. That I can't tell you how many core bands that I can't tell apart.
Yeah.
But I think that there's something a little bit more authentic about albums from this era for some reason. And that's not to discredit modern metal by any means, but there is a certain I kind of liken it to how practical effects used to be used in films, and now it's pretty much almost always CGI.
Yeah.
Because back then you obviously had tape. You didn't have, even digital audio workstations were in their kind of infancy. So you kind of had to nail down your parts, but also like know the sound you were going for. And that kind of helped these bands like never make the same album twice, in my opinion. And
also,
and that's,
I think that also there used to be, like, for a lack of a better term, the voice of the producer or the engineer. Whereas now, like, things are so samey that everyone's kind of going for the same thing, or they're working with the same presets or whatever the fuck it is that makes all these albums just sound alike. And back in the day, I think it was more of a norm to go to a producer and say, well, we like what you've done. We want you to put your spin on our music. And even the people today that are considered great producers, they still don't really have their own voice. It's still like, you're a hired gun, make the shit sound, like the normal modern stuff sounds. And it's kind of a letdown, but I always just chalk that up to me being an old dude, because it seems like a lot of younger people like the clicky kick drum sound and all of that shit. And so, but yeah, you are right. Like, I do think that even though you could say that some of it is considered overproduction with adding a lot of reverb and all this other shit, I do think that it's almost like the band collaborating with that particular producer. And that's, like you said, they never made the same album twice. Or if they did, they may have gone to a different producer, and the sound at least varied. And so it was more enjoyable to hear the band do something that at least sounded a little different.
Yeah, for sure. So, have you got anything else to say on that one?
I don't.
I've pretty much.
I don't. I love that album, and I'm glad we got to talk about it, because
cool.
It's not in my top 5, and it hurt me to not put it there.
Oof! Ouch.
So my number 5. This is going to be really brief, because we have already talked about this album in a podcast. So I'm going to use this not only as a time to talk about how much I love this album, but also as a commercial for everyone to go and listen to our podcast episode that we did on this band. My number 5 is Bleach from Nirvana. And our very first episode was ranking the Nirvana discography. So if you want to hear us go really in depth into Bleach, go listen to that. But what I'm going to say about this one is that It had to go in my list because Nirvana is not only one of my favorite bands, but they are one of the most important bands in my life. And when this album came out in 1989, I had no fucking idea who Nirvana was. I didn't even hear this album until like 2 years later. So I didn't know they existed. In 1991, like many other people of my age, I got really excited about Nevermind when it came out. And so, of course, I went back to listen to Bleach. And I didn't like it at first. It was not a good first impression. But later on down the line, it grew on me, and it started to become a thing where once I was realistic about how influential Nirvana was on me in the music I listened to and the music I was making when I started to play guitar and started to join bands and started to write songs, it became a way more important album for me because it was almost like an example of a starting point if I wanted to start a band. Like, I could go back to listen to Bleach and be like, this amazing band started here with this more raw, sort of pure, honest first step in the Nirvana, unfortunately, very short story. And so it's just one of those albums that I listen to it and it just sort of gives me that feeling of, oh, this is what it feels like to start a band when you're just getting things going, you're figuring out your sound. Maybe you don't have a shitload of money to get a badass production, especially in the 80s. And it just sounds like that raw urgency of a young garage band or whatever. And so this is an album that just, it had to be in my top 5. It's not my favorite Nirvana album. If you want to hear what my favorite Nirvana album is, go listen to that episode after this one. Finish this one first. But so yeah, I'm going to be real quick with that one. So my number 5 is Bleach.
Cool. Yeah, and I just want to say that's definitely, if you're a metalhead trying to get into Nirvana, that's where you start, in my opinion.
Which is weird because I was a metalhead and I didn't like Bleach as much as Nevermind. I still don't, but it's an interesting way to put it, though.
Yeah, I suppose it really would depend on the listener, because Nevermind is the classic, but Bleach is definitely the next step if you're into the harder shit.
Yeah, totally.
Cool. So
let's move on to your number 4.
That leads me to number 4. For number 4, I've gone for. Now, this is why I couldn't order any of them, because they are all so independent landmark albums in their own kind of style.
Okay.
With maybe a couple deep cuts thrown in there. But this one, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Pretty Hate Machine by 9 Inch Nails.
Nice. Oh man, that's good.
Such a good album. A real landmark industrial masterpiece.
I love how this is going, by the way. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. I love how this is going.
Dude, you're in for a treat. I've got some absolute corkers in here, dude. So yeah, obviously with Pretty Hate Machine, it was 9 Inch Nails' debut album. You got songs like Head Like a Hole. Head Like a Hole, the synth bass riff in that was solely responsible for me getting into industrial like that there, which is funny because the actual song that got me into metal in the first place was Rammstein's Du Hast. But
yeah.
I never did like a proper industrial deep dive until I discovered 9 Inch Nails, at which point I discovered, holy shit, dark sounding guitar music can be made with, drum machines and synthesizers to get this real kind of, I'm hesitant to call it robotic. I don't think anyone would like to have their music called robotic, but it's almost like, it's like there is a machine in the title. So it gives off the industrial vibe. And I just love that this whole album is like some kind of, dark vibe to it throughout, and it's not necessarily the most in your face. You've got the odd song, but songs like Head Like a Hole, great song. Terrible Lie, another great one. Down in It, it's banger central on this album. And then you've got like songs like Sanctified and Something I Can Never Have, and I can't think of a single song on here that doesn't get me going,
Yeah.
Perhaps,
And it's really is, like you said about the Testament album, I feel like this album's very catchy. And I think that's the thing that
yes,
one of the many aspects of it that makes it great, because like you said, it is industrial, but it also, not just this album, I think everything that Trent Reznor has done, even when he's being super electronic with shit, it still has some sort of an organic quality to it that he's able to put into it.
definitely.
But this album is one of those things where I just feel like the catchiness of it all, it transcends the label,
Yeah, and I haven't even got to like side B yet. You've got the 1-2 punch of Kinda I Want To and Sin, great songs. I'd say the only like kind of dip for me is maybe tracks 8 and 9, but even those are catchy and good songs. I particularly like, and I feel like it's underrated, I like the song Ring Finger that closes out the record.
Yeah.
And I noticed when, I used to get off of the bus from school and I'd have a little bit of a walk home. It was, it was quite far down the street. And I realized that Ring Finger was like the perfect perfect walking pace. I was just walking one day and I didn't even realize I was doing it until I realized, holy shit, I don't know what BPM it is, but whatever it is legit mark for mark my walking speed. And I've never had that with like any other song. But
also the beginning of that song always makes me think of New Order. Like it always sounds like a New Order song's about to start.
Sounds like Blue Monday at the start, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's a tune in itself, to be honest. I do like that song.
One of my favorite things that Trent Reznor does, and it's not just Trent Reznor, it's any kind of music that incorporates this, which is a lot of like post-hardcore kind of stuff, and I guess post-punk as well. But he puts in odd notes that on paper don't fit, but sound fucking badass in this song. Like when you're talking about Terrible Lie, the end of it where it has like every time that kicks in, I'm like, that's so good. But if you listen to it, it doesn't really go with it, but it goes perfectly with it. So that is genius songwriting right there.
There's something there really is something to be said for the importance of dissonance in music.
Agreed.
Because
yes.
So many people tend to think dissonance, that sounds icky. I don't want dissonance in my music because that won't make people want to listen to it.
And that's fine. They can go listen to Journey and fuck off for all I care.
Yeah. and it's so funny when you think, because dissonance can be used in quite a beautiful way. There's a song later in this list. There's a title track in this list that I will get to later on. But yeah, it's a good one. It's a big boy.
Nice.
But yeah, this album sold me on industrial metal and industrial music in general. This album has a vibe all its own.
Yeah. Funny enough, when it first came out, I didn't get into it, but I didn't get into it because my older brother had a friend who was really into this album and was trying to get me to listen to it.
Yeah.
And for some reason, he decided he was going to talk shit about another album that was out around the same time that is on my list. And because he was saying that this album sucked, I'm like, well, fuck your Nine Inch Nails bullshit. Very quickly, though, with it, like my Nine Inch Nails story starts with Broken. So once I heard Wish off of Broken, I was in full on and have been a Nine Inch Nails fan ever since. But there's no denying that Pretty Hate Machine is a classic. This is great because this is kind of becoming, you're helping me build a top 10 when I only did a top 5. So I'm loving this so far.
I've kind of become this like curator of sorts. Yeah, I can pride myself in the variety in my list. I feel like I've hit a good 5.
Totally. So are you done with Pretty Hate Machine?
I'm all wrapped up on number 4. You go for it, dude.
Okay, my number 4. We're gonna shift again here. My number 4 is the album "Full Moon Fever" by Tom Petty.
Wow.
Which is
Running down a dream.
fuck yeah.
Hell yeah.
Tom Petty is one of my favorite musicians and songwriters of all time. And Full Moon Fever was my first Tom Petty album. Like, I knew Tom Petty's songs prior to this album coming out, but I bought this album in '89 and wore it the fuck out, because it's almost nowadays you listen to this album and it's almost like a greatest hits album. I mean, Free Fallin', I Won't Back Down, Love Is a Long Road, A Face in the Crowd, Running Down a Dream, Feel a Whole Lot Better, You're So Bad. It's all of these songs were singles.
Insane track list.
In some way or another. And sure, side 2 or the latter half of the album, it gets a little bit weaker, but it is just hit after hit. And I Won't Back Down is one of my favorite songs ever. Something about it. It's just the whole vibe of it, the words, it's just fucking great. And over the years, Tom Petty has become a hero of mine. Mostly just not, obviously because of his he was such a prolific and amazing songwriter and performer, but also as a human being. When it comes to his decisions that he made artistically and in his life, he was a very uncompromising person. If you haven't ever watched it, I'd recommend finding the Tom Petty documentary that's out there somewhere. It's called Running Down a Dream. It's like I think it's 4 hours long, but you would not even know. It is the kind of in-depth documentary that we would want done with our favorite bands. Yeah. It's like that. And it really just drives home the point that he really is, I don't know. He's one of those songwriters and musicians that I think his mark on the world of music is not going to fade anytime soon. He's going to be somebody that people are still talking about 50 years down the line. And it's just timeless music to me. So, and it's, like I said, it's one of these albums that has lived with me since 1989, and I've never gotten tired of it. So that's why it's here at number 4.
Awesome. I'm going to chime in here and say that I was introduced. Now, you'll like this. Another reason San Andreas is such a great Grand Theft Auto game is because Running Down a Dream is on the soundtrack.
Oh, shit, yeah.
The classic rock station in that game is a greatest hits album. Like, check out the KDST running order for the classic rock radio in GTA San Andreas. So good. I just
nice.
I always have to.
There's a part of me that hurts. It hurts my heart a little bit when Tom Petty gets lumped in with classic rock.
Yeah,
because I'm all like, nah, I don't know. Like, because I don't feel like anything Tom Petty did sounds dated. Sure, the production quality, has improved over the years and things like that. But I really think as songs, like I'll just say it a million times. It's just timeless. Pretty much everything he did.
Yeah, I generally speaking, I only really consider things classic rock to fit like a certain mood or a certain vibe I'm in.
Yeah.
But I would generally consider the things I consider classic rock personally is anything predating glam and thrash.
Yeah, totally. Although that's the weird thing, though. And it's funny because you're 20 years younger than me and you're into the same music that I'm into. But you think about in the 1980s, there was a fad that started to happen, and that was called oldies. And oldies was music from the 50s and 60s, which was 20 years before. So right now we are talking about oldies. More than oldies. Yeah. So it's so funny to think about how I guess there was a big shift from 1950s to 1980s, but once you get to the 90s, it doesn't feel like there's been that big of a shift to now, because in my opinion, you listen to shit like, I don't know, Pearl Jam And it doesn't sound like an oldie. It just sounds like a song, from a different time, maybe a few years back. But it doesn't have that same thing where in the 1980s we were all listening to new wave music or metal music, and then you would turn on the oldies and you would hear like "The Lion Sleeps Tonight." It's like it was like, when the fuck did this come out? So it's so weird to think that we're here talking about music that would be on the oldies channel. if there was one for rock music.
It really does, it really does strike me, that the passage of time is such a weird one, because I recently ran it over in my head and I started thinking, shit, stuff from the 90s is turning 30. And, that's the decade I was born in. And, I was born in, obviously, like the later end of it. So, you're talking 98. But, to think that's only 8 more years.
Yeah. I'll just say, just think of it as that you were lucky enough to get in there at the end of the 90s.
Yeah. It's weird as well, being like the kind of the last generation of the millennium, of that millennium, is that we were the generation, my generation specifically, that had a VHS DVD combo. Like,
yeah.
We had obviously VCRs and we had DVDs, but I think there was a brief time in like the late 90s to about the mid 2000s where people realized, we got both for a moment, so we're going to have a VHS DVD combo. And I remember someone described that to me one time, and I said, wow, that makes a shit ton of sense.
Not only that, they started selling TVs that had the DVD player and VCR built into it.
Yeah.
Which, like, when I was a kid, if you had told me that would be a thing, I'd be like, why can't we have that right now?
Yeah.
It's like, why do we got to have all these wires and shit everywhere?
Yeah. I get real nostalgic for shit like that, but yeah.
Well, right, I'm done with my number 4, so let's move on to your number 3. I'm excited about this.
Okay, so for my number 3, I've gone a little bit more obscure, but it's a great record nonetheless, and I have gone with the self-titled debut album from the glam band that came along way too fucking late, called Danger Danger.
Wait, what?
Danger Danger.
Okay.
Hell yeah.
I did not expect this, but this is great.
This here is one of my favorite glam metal albums. It's quite soft comparatively, but you cannot fault the catchiness of any of these songs.
So before you get into it, I'm gonna tell you, like, my memory of this band was seeing a commercial for the album on MTV, and I just remember it being so funny because the commercial said, "The debut album from Danger Danger featuring Naughty Naughty and Bang Bang."
Yeah. See,
these dudes love repeating words twice.
Honestly, it took me a moment to really like hone in on that, but I eventually did, and I'm ashamed of myself that it took me about 30 listens of this album to realize, holy shit, these guys found a formula and fucking ran with it. Because the two biggest singles from the album are Naughty Naughty and Bang Bang. The band's called Danger Danger, but I gotta say, Naughty Naughty, Under the Gun, Saturday Night. They've got ballads on here. Don't Walk Away, One Step from Paradise. It's like if Poison stripped back a little bit of the glam and traded it for keyboards, and that's pretty much this album. But I just find myself so drawn to it because so many of the songs just get stuck right in your head. Bang Bang is, for want of a better phrase, an absolute banger. Rock America, it Feels Like Love, Live It Up. I just love this album. I have to admit, I've
never listened to this album all the way through.
Dude,
so maybe I need to now.
Hell yeah. You just need to find yourself a nice a nice evening with a sunset where you can see the skyline and the sky's kind of pink and you've got that kind of 80s vibe going on. This album, you know, I know a lot of, you know, purists are going to turn around and say, fucking poser. He likes fucking keyboards. Fuck this guy. But, you know, I wouldn't call this a guilty pleasure because I'm proud of loving this, but I would understand why other people would call it a guilty pleasure.
I feel like people like you and me don't have guilty pleasures. We just have pleasures.
Hell yeah. You know, I'm glam and I'm proud. But yeah, as far as it goes, this is a glam album done right, and it's kind of that final unfortunate wave of bands that could have been so much bigger, because had this album been released in, say, you know, 84, 85, there is no reason that they couldn't have been in the leagues of, say, you know, Poison, Motley Crue, Def Leppard, because so many of these songs are just so goddamn catchy.
And that's the thing that I think it's interesting to point out about 1989, is that you could make the argument that, you know, glam and thrash were already on their way out in certain ways. Yet you had brand new bands who are now considered classic bands release their debut albums from both camps. There's all sorts of debut thrash albums and all sorts of debut like hard rock and I guess hair metal. I think the hair metal thing had kind of gone away. It was more of just an 80s hard rock. And sure, they maybe still did their hair, but they were now all wearing leather jackets and denim or something like that, you know?
I think one of the most hilarious examples of this era is a band like Trickster, for example, where they're all wearing flannel shirts, but they're playing this kind of style music.
Yeah.
I think.
Did you watch my old Headbangers Ball episode where I talked about that video?
I fucking love that series, dude. Keep it up. But the
new one coming soon.
Hell yeah. Which I discovered that Leatherface tune through your show, and it's
love it.
For
those of you who don't know, go subscribe to the Old Head YouTube channel, and I do a series of videos on Saturdays called Old Head Bangers Ball, where I play old music videos from that classic era of Headbangers Ball, and I either talk them up or, in the case of the one that is going to be coming out, I talk a little shit.
I've got a little video idea planned as well.
Cool.
Your the Leatherface thing made me notice something,
Nice.
and I'm gonna do a video based around videos recorded in the desert in 1990 and 1991 and the significance of that.
Okay. Are you going to consider? Well, can we move it to 92? Well, I don't know if the video was 92, but you're going to include November Rain in that?
That's another good one. I need to include
You got
that.
the big Slash guitar solo in the middle of the desert with the church.
Oh,
That's
for
some
sure.
classic imagery right there.
Hell yeah, man. Like I've got a pretty good conspiracy theory going on with this, and I'll get to that in the video. But
Cool.
for now,
I can't wait. Go subscribe to Eddie Sparxx on YouTube.
hell yeah. I'm just super fucking amped because I think I'm onto something.
No, we're talking about Danger Danger, featuring Naughty Naughty and Bang Bang.
Okay. I'll reel it in.
But yeah, I'm gonna go listen to this album pretty soon because I feel like maybe it's about time.
Again, it's quite sweet and saccharine a little bit in places. It's a polished album,
Yeah.
but in the right way, in the right context. So I feel like that, again, that's where the production benefits the music.
Yeah, I always kind of lump them all in with like Firehouse and those bands where it's like it's rock and roll, but it's very keyboard heavy.
You are correct.
Okay, cool.
That is dead on the money. Cool.
You still got things to say about that one?
I'm pretty much out of material with Danger Danger. You want to take it to your number 3?
Yes. And so the one thing that I kept thinking when I was putting together my top 5 was that I'm going to have to admit that I'm not cool. I'm going to lose many cool points
Oh shit.
For things I include and things that I leave out. But luckily, you beat me to it by being kind of uncool before before me. So my number 3 album from 1989 is Pump from Aerosmith.
Hey.
And I mean, this is a motherfucker of an album, and it's really cool because it was almost like Aerosmith already made a comeback with Permanent Vacation, and then they put out a fucking better album with Pump, and blew up even bigger. And the album is fucking huge. The production is huge. The songs are huge, and it's just one of those things where there's so many great songs. And I know around this time, especially starting with Permanent Vacation, they had songwriting collaborators, but not on everything. And one of the things that I think is the most impressive, even though like it was overplayed, and I think it's easy to just gloss over it, but the song Janie's Got a Gun is an incredibly well-written song.
Yeah.
In the structure of the song and everything about it. And that was an Aerosmith original. They didn't have any other songwriter on board with that. So you can see that these dudes most of the time didn't really need the help. So, but you got the beginning of the album with Young Lust and Fine, there are just 2 fucking really fun songs. Then you go straight into Love in an Elevator. Monkey on My Back's a great song. Janie's Got a Gun, obviously. The Other Side. And then you skip a little bit later. The end of the album has What It Takes. Once again, all these fucking hits on this album that are all great songs. And maybe you could say this album hasn't aged as well as other ones have, but when it comes to Aerosmith, because those guys were so consistent in the kind of things they wanted to do, it just sounds like an Aerosmith album. It's like, I don't care what year it's from. I have a great time listening to Aerosmith always. And I would have to say that if somebody out there doesn't have a good time listening to Aerosmith, I don't want to fucking hang out with them anyway. So, but another important thing for me anyway is the fact that you listen to Steven Tyler's vocals. He's an amazing vocalist, and on this album, there's so many moments where I'm like, if you watch like footage, there's footage you can watch online of them recording the album and him doing the vocals, and the control and range that dude had on his voice. And at the time, he was my age right now. He was 41, 42 years old, belting out this incredible shit. And he still does it today. Like, people try to talk shit about him, but I'm like, dude, I've seen the fucking concerts. The dude still fucking sings that well at 70, whatever he is now. One of my favorite singers. But not just that, I'm gonna throw down the gauntlet, as they say, or draw a line in the sand, and you can join me on this side of the line or stay over there. But I am going to say it. Aerosmith is the greatest American rock and roll band. There is not a better American rock and roll. You could make an argument for metal bands, fine. I'm talking rock and roll. There is no better band than Aerosmith. And Pump is a fucking fantastic album, one that I got in 1989, and I still love it to pieces today. So there you go. You could consider that an uncool addition to my my top 5, but I love it.
Nah, it's awesome, man. You know, I remember I kind of always knew the hits with Aerosmith growing up, and you know, I was a big fan of them through Wayne's World 2 growing up, and that's the thing. Like, so many of their songs are in like movies as well, but you're right about them being like the greatest rock and roll band. Because I
said American, because I'm not gonna I'm not gonna shit on anywhere in Europe, especially the UK, because I mean, without the UK there would be no Aerosmith. So
I mean, I mean, if you trace it back though, you know, we had the British invasion, but
But the Rolling Stones are important. Like if the Aerosmith wouldn't exist without the Rolling Stones. Now, when people try to talk shit and say they're a Stones ripoff, I think that they're people that don't know anything about music.
Yeah,
but yeah.
But I was actually kind of backing you up there, because I'm going to say we had the British invasion, but obviously rock and roll originated in America. You know, with the 50s.
Yeah,
thing.
but I don't. This is a slippery slope for me, because you're going to be referring to artists that, for the most part, were stealing music from other people.
Yeah. When you get to the 60s and 50s, and
now, if you want to talk,
if
you want to talk about Chuck Berry and Little Richard and people like that, then I'm on board. But if you say Elvis, I'm gonna tell you to get the fuck out, because it's just like. But at the same time, Elvis influenced bands like the Beatles, who took that and did. Sure, in the beginning, Beatles did a lot of fucking cover songs, but they started to do their own original take on things and not just outright stealing things. And so,
sure.
So I think the important rock and roll started in England. And to be fair, like I always say that the best music all started with one particular song. Like I love the Beatles. The Beatles are great. We could talk about the Beatles all day, and I would probably be able to do a full podcast just talking about them. But to me, great music started when the Kinks put out "You Really Got Me." Like once that fucking song comes out, the game has changed, and great music just starts to blossom from that point. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, dude. Have you seen the Metal Evolution documentary series?
I own those on DVD.
Fuck yeah. Isn't the what song is it? Is it Rocket 88 that's like the first recorded use of a distorted guitar?
I believe it is the one where what's his name? Ike Turner plays on it, and his amp was broken or something. Yeah, I mean that's amazing. The beginning of Distortion. That shit is fascinating to me. But yeah, that's a big digression going on here. Let's skip forward to your number 2.
No worries. So my number 2, this is another bit of a deep cut gem, but from the other side of the genre pool. I'm going to go ahead and say "Louder Than Love" by Soundgarden.
Oh, yes.
It's in my opinion, this is one of the most underrated albums of all time.
Yeah.
People are so quick to dismiss this album as, well, they were still, figuring out who they were. They weren't quite, the really mature songwriters they were on, Super Unknown. And it's like, dude, put this album on. It's a fucking ripper. It's got so many great Zeppelin Sabbath-esque riffs on it, but they sound totally original at the same time. And they have
agreed.
this, it's like, it does have that vibe, but through a completely different lens. So obviously you've got, Soundgarden were one of the earliest grunge bands, but they also, I think the thing with grunge to remember is it was a scene. It wasn't necessarily a distinct one sound, because obviously grunge is dirtier, more stripped back, no theatrics, just raw live energy, that kind of thing. And they all had a common thread kind of image-wise, but when it comes to the big four of grunge, you cannot turn around and say that Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, Nirvana, and Soundgarden sound completely alike, because they all bring something completely unique to the table.
I agree with you totally. I agree with that as the big four of grunge, because it's it's undisputed, I would think, but yeah, they all had their own thing going. And Soundgarden to me was the most mature sounding, I guess, right off the bat. Like they seemed, I don't know what it is about them. They had a uniqueness to them that really set them apart early on.
It's almost like a sophistication, but I can't quite tell what it is. I think it could just be down to the fact that they play around with a lot of odd time signatures and things like that. And for something so stripped back, it's actually quite proggy.
Yeah, totally.
And with this album, obviously, I'm gonna get up the track listing again because I was a dunce and I didn't switch to it in time. Where is Louder Than Love? There it is. Coming right off the bat, you got Ugly Truth, Hands All Over. And I got a funny little story about Hands All Over. I'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Gun, fucking Gun is full on doom metal.
Yeah, and then speeds up.
Down, now. Power Trip, get on the Snake. Is pretty tongue in cheek, but it has that.
If you listen to a lot of these songs, it's interesting that this was on a major label because the songwriting does not sound like a band that's trying to break big and cross over to the mainstream. They sound like they got signed and went, let's just make kind of the weirdest thing that we can make while still being sort of melodic at the same time.
Oh, for sure. And, I'm going to back that up with a song like I Awake. I Awake is one of my favorite Soundgarden songs. And I remember looking up a list of it was something along the lines of every Soundgarden song ranked and voice crack there, sorry. Every Soundgarden song ranked, and this song was if it wasn't at the bottom, it was second to the bottom, and I was like, what?
Yeah, that's ridiculous. By the way, I don't ever want to rank songs.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Well, maybe if we're being really limited, but an entire band's discography ranking the songs, whoever does those, they're glossing over a lot of things. I feel most of the time.
I think as well, there's something to be said for if you have the capacity to rank an entire fucking band's songs. Albums are one thing, but songs. See a fucking therapist. Jesus Christ. But, Loud Love, the kind of title track, there's so many great riffs on here. I think it's important.
Fun fact about Loud Love that's connected to what we're already talking about. If you watch the music video for Loud Love, it has, is it Jason Everman? Is that his name? Who was in Nirvana, is the guitar player. He didn't play on Louder Than Love, but he joined the band as the bass player, I believe.
No way.
I never
noticed that.
Yeah, so the fourth member of Nirvana on Bleach joined Soundgarden just in time to do the Loud Love music video. So you'll see Jason Everman, I think that's his name, playing bass guitar in that music video.
That's so cool. I love the family tree of all the grunge bands as well.
Hell yeah.
Every single person was in every single band.
Totally.
There's loads of them. And then even a song like Big Dumb Sex, which is, Big Dumb Sex is the best satire I think there is in grunge, because it's a clear dig at bands like Motley Crue and Poison and that. And that lyric of, yeah, I know what to do. I'm gonna fuck you. Oh, I just love that.
And I always love at the very end when they slow it down and the song ends and you hear them go, fuck you.
Yeah. This for sure is it's even produced in almost an 80s metal way, but just grungy enough to not fall victim to that kind of vibe that would probably fuck with it.
Yeah.
But I think, was it Terry Date that produced this?
I believe so. That's the name that's in my head right now. I think it was Terry Date. Pantera fame.
Yeah, because Terry Date's a very metal centric producer, and obviously, if I had to say, for my favorite Soundgarden album, it would probably be between Louder Than Love or Bad Motorfinger.
Agreed. I'm with you.
But that's a thing for a different episode.
It's for our Soundgarden ranking episode, which is going to happen for sure.
For sure, but it's just such a. I feel sorry for this record because people fucking don't talk about it enough. For sure. This is definitely the most underrated Soundgarden album, with Ultra Mega OK close behind it.
Totally.
And yeah, that is my take on my number 2, Louder Than Love.
And it's great because you're mentioning albums that I had to leave out, and it hurt me to leave them out. So my number 2 is probably the most out of left field, because if you look at what I've done so far, they are bigger albums from that particular year. But my number 2 is an album that is a very small release, and a lot of people don't even fucking talk about this band at all, and I think that they should. And they are from they're from your neck of the woods. My number 2 album is the album The Fear from the thrash metal band Acid Rain. And it's just a fucking remarkable album to me, and on top of it, I think that it's a ridiculously underrated album and band. And really, like, I was going through, and there's all these great thrash metal albums that I didn't include, and I was listening to them and sort of picking out the things that made them unique to me and what I loved about them. And a lot of those other thrash metal albums, and I'm even going to throw Practice What You Preach in that group, they all kind of have the same kind of thing going for them. Whereas Acid Rain did not. These guys, this was their debut album. They did like a mini album prior to this called Moshkinstein. But the fear is, it's like, it's as ambitious as it is effortless. It almost seems like they don't quite give too much of a fuck, but they still want to write these big epic songs. And so there's like a rawness and a sort of almost not quite reined in kind of quality to the album. And it's not perfect performances on this album, but it is exhilarating thrash metal, and it feels like it might fall to pieces at any moment, but it doesn't. It's super fun. There's all these twists and turns. It's an album that is, it's not just this album. Everything Acid Rain has done, they know how to be serious and mature about certain parts of their songs, and at other times be a little bit wacky and out of left field with other parts of their songs. And they did it so fucking right. And unfortunately, they got lumped in, I think, as a joke band back in the day, which was kind of shitty, because if you really dig into this band, you realize that they were just a thrash metal band that had a sense of humor, which is like what I guess you could say about Anthrax. But I mean, people like to talk shit about Anthrax because apparently you're not supposed to have fun when you play thrash metal. But whatever. But this is like one of those albums where, unlike the 2 previous albums I talked about, there's no hits off this. I mean, they had Humanoia, which became a single a little bit later, but this wasn't a hit album. But it's got all of the things that I love about thrash metal in it. It's fast, it's aggressive. They had their own unique thing going, in my opinion. And it's unfortunate that the UK thrash scene from that time didn't get promoted over here in America. So in America, on MTV, you would see the American thrash bands, and you would see some of the German thrash bands, and then you would see Sepultura. The only time we ever saw a UK thrash metal video that I remember was the video for Onslaught doing their cover of Let There Be Rock by AC/DC. That is as far as it went. So, because I do think these bands stand out, and Acid Rain's one of those bands that if you are a subscriber to my channel, you know that I fly the flag for this band big time. They're together now and just put out a fucking amazing album, and I'll be singing their praises forever. But I really do think that in 1989, when there was a jillion thrash metal albums coming out, I really do think that The Fear stands out from all of those, and it just never gets old to me. I fucking love it. So I had to include it at number 2. A kind of a left turn or whatever from what I was talking about, but I do love this album.
Yeah, I totally need to check out Acid Rain, and I'm glad that you've recommended that album to me, because that's kind of, this kind of era is the thing I would reach for.
Yeah.
So
my favorite Acid Rain album, if you want to start, is called Obnoxious, and that's the one that came out in 1991, I believe. Oh no, it was 1990. Yeah. But this one's great too. The new one, it's called The Age of Entitlement. Like that, that is great. If you want to hear an old school style thrash done with modern elements and it works to me, then that's the best place to go. But we're talking about The Fear, and I love it.
Awesome. Just going back to what you said as well about, bands having a sense of humor. I think that is such a key component that so many bands shy away from, because they're too scared to, not be taken seriously.
Yeah.
But, for me personally, in my own personal experience, I'm more drawn to the bands where I know that its members have a personality and things like that. And
it's very important when you want to hang out with a band as well as listen to their music.
Yeah. Like, say, for example, like countless scenes from like Year and a Half in the Life of Metallica, for example. There's so much. I'll have to find the video and I'll have to credit this guy. He's like a Drum Teacher Reacts kind of channel. And he said something along the lines of, there's room for comedy in the devil's music. Like just as like kind of a laugh in response to, I think it was the bit where I think it's like a drum cam of Dave Lombardo playing Angel of Death live, and where everything drops out and it's just the double kick.
Yeah.
He holds on to it for like a ridiculous amount of time, looks at his watch, keeps going, and then does the fill and goes back into the song.
That's awesome.
But the quote from that was, "There's room for comedy in the devil's music," and I fucking live by that rule.
Yeah, it's like I've never understood people giving. Well, it's not. I don't think it's just the sense of humor. I think a lot of those bands that had no problem with having some personality, with their music, those were also the ones that I think had no problem dabbling in other areas of rock music. Because you had, obviously Anthrax, and they dabbled in the hip hop world. And another band that we're going to get to for my number 1 also was a band that dabbled, and they all seemed like they were pretty lighthearted folk for the most part. But before we get to that, we got to go with your number 1.
Are we going to have the same number 1? Now,
we could possibly have the same number 1, and that would make this the most perfect episode ever.
I think, this is the only spot where there is an order to it, because this is my favorite album from that year.
Yeah.
I've gone for The Real Thing by Faith No More.
Yes,
Fuck
sir.
Yes. Yeah.
That is my number 1 as well. Let's just dig into this motherfucker.
Hell yeah. Awesome. That wraps this one up perfectly. So, no question, no one else sounds like Faith No More.
Yeah.
They don't. There are countless alt metal bands that, have influence. Don't get me wrong, Faith No More's influence is far reaching, but nobody, and I mean no one, has captured the sound that these 5 guys make. And even though it's changed over the years, obviously you had Chuck Mosley for the first 2 albums, and then you had Jim Martin for the first 4 as the guitarist, and then gradually you had Trace Spruance as the guitarist on King for a Day, and then John Hudson on guitar for these last 2 albums, and he's been the longest running guitarist they've had yet. But onto The Real Thing. Now, all of the music for The Real Thing was written before Mike Patton joined the band. So Mike Patton dropped out of college to join Faith No More. He was already in Mr. Bungle, but he wanted to, obviously branch out and do shitloads of different projects, which, he managed to do throughout his career. But that's a different story altogether, the amount of projects he's done. But from out of nowhere, perfect album opener, in my opinion. Such a energetic burst. Epic might be overplayed, but is a classic. Falling to Pieces, massively underrated tune, in my opinion, and has the best music video of all time. I will stand by that.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
Then Surprise You're Dead. You've heard these three very, radio-friendly tracks for the first three, while still having like kind of a weird atmosphere. And then all of a sudden you get to these really heavy tracks like Surprise You're Dead, Zombie Eaters, and The Real Thing. They all have really crushing moments of heaviness.
Yeah.
And what was it I said earlier about a title track being something...
using dissonance or yeah.
That's the thing. The guitar part in The Real Thing, where it goes da na da da na 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 da na da da na na na, the pinnacle of happiness, filling up your soul. I think that's like the only gripe like on this album. But even at this point, I've listened to it so much, and the vocal style he uses on this evokes such a nostalgia on me that my girlfriend tried to ruin this album for me by pointing out his vocals, and she fucking failed, because this album holds up. It's great. Yeah. And I don't think I've ever heard another band pull off having a song that sounds like Slayer and then having a lounge song on it as well. Edge of the World, obviously Edge of the World isn't on all of the pressings.
I'm on my vinyl pressing. It's not on it from '89.
Yeah. I've got an original pressing of it as well, and it's not on there. But in a way, I kind of feel like that's the album closer for me, because the first time I heard it on the CD version.
So my first copy was on cassette, and The Edge of the World's actually the end of side one.
I know. Isn't it weird how they used to order albums differently depending on the format?
I mean, it makes sense, I guess. Yeah. But I mean, I just don't know why they left it off of the vinyl. Maybe they didn't have enough room for it or something, but I don't know.
Perhaps they had this idea that maybe it was too weird, and then they immediately thought, actually, nah. But then again, Faith No More has never struck me as a band that felt like they could restrict themselves in any way.
Well, they could have had some pressure from the label, maybe, but I don't know.
Yeah, because this is possibly their most commercial album.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's the best selling album that they've done.
And another important thing to note is that, after The Real Thing, Faith No More kind of fell out of favor in the US, whereas like in places like Europe and stuff, Angel Dust was really well received. And I feel like, from what I've heard, Angel Dust got kind of dogged in the US.
I mean, it didn't by me. I loved that album when it came out, and it totally was one of those game changers for me. But you are right. It's weird to hear the backpedaling that the metal community has on a lot of albums, where later on down the line, there's a lot of revisionist shit that goes on where people are like, oh, the Angel Dust, it was influential back in the day. It was not. I mean, it may have been to some people, but you didn't listen to it until 10 years later or whatever the fuck, whoever it is that's talking about it. I'm like, no, people didn't like it. And it blew me away at the time, but we're talking about The Real Thing, which had a similar effect on me. The Real Thing was one of those albums that I always like to say was everything I never knew I wanted to hear, like when it came out.
I think, as well, on any Faith No More album, you can tell it's them, but they never make the same album twice.
Absolutely.
And this album kind of got them lumped in with the funk metal thing, even though it's not strictly funk metal in any way, shape, or form, apart from maybe Bill Gould's bass playing. But aside from that, Faith No More, even down...
You're right. Yeah. Jim Martin didn't play funk guitar any time. I don't remember him ever playing that. So, yeah.
I find it so fascinating how a band can come out of anywhere, and this is why Faith No More are like joint first for my favorite band with Metallica, because while Metallica I feel do a great job of the genre they're in,
Yeah.
Faith No More made their own genre. You know, Faith No More can make. They're the only band that I feel I can actually convincingly have, you know, a thrash song and a lounge song in the same playlist without being a cocky asshole.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Totally.
like, there's just something about the way they work that, you know, obviously you've got so many different influences pulled from so many different areas. They're like I've heard the analogy used that they're like a 5-pointed spider web, and they're all pulling off in their own distinct direction. Like you've got, you know, Jim Martin was obviously the metal guy. Mike Patton is, you know, the man of 1,000 voices, or at least one of them. Bill Gould has his complete own style of bass playing, massively underrated. You've got Roddy Bottum's keys. You know, he kind of made keyboards cool in a non-glam setting.
Yeah, he's one of those people that what he brings to the songs. When you have an album like King for a Day, where there's certain songs that don't have keyboard parts, I'm kind of like, oh, that sucks. Like
Yeah.
you know, I like what he brings to it.
Yeah, and like this album, you know, for a while I started thinking, oh, maybe this album is like overrated. I was like, no. It just has to, you know, stand with, you know, Angel Dust and King for a Day, and this is my second favorite Faith No More album behind Angel Dust.
Yeah.
But my God, if this, like, even when people turn around and say the production's dated, I'm like, is it though? Because it's so independent in its own right that I honestly can't think of anything else that sounds like it.
Yeah,
You know,
I just don't. I'll argue this point till I'm blue in the face about people talking about albums, the production being dated. I'm like, the fucking songs are dated. Like, it's dated to when it came out.
Yeah.
So, and the thing is, these albums came out when they came out. Like, that's the thing, is that you don't hear, like, they're not going to go back and completely remix, I don't know, the first Led Zeppelin album, because they're like, oh, it sounds like it came out in the early 70s. Yeah, that's what's great about it. And then
Yeah, exactly.
and so, like, that's why, like, I hate remasters, but I mostly hate remixes and remasters. When it's like the album came out how it came out. It's a part of history. It's a part of a band's history. For some of us, it's part of our personal history. And I like hearing the albums the way that they sounded at the time. And I don't want anything to be tweaked. I want it to sound how it sounded. And so sure, you could say that it sounds dated, but that you're going to have to talk about every aspect of the actual album. And so this album sounds like 1989, and that's what's great about it. You know, that's what's great about albums from 1989. They sound like that time period. So
I think, you know, the only thing that strikes me as a big no-no with anything like dated is like when a band will say the name of the year in the song, but even then it doesn't bother me that much, you know, because like you say, the reason it's dated to a time period is because it came out then, you know.
Well, yeah, sometimes it's important for I can't think of a rock song right off the bat that has a year in it. My brain immediately goes to Fight the Power by Public Enemy. 1989, another summer. I'm just like, yeah, but it brings you back to what was going on in 89. I know we're rock and metal, and I'm not I'm talking hip hop here, but
hey, it's cool to branch out, dude. We don't have to stay too rooted in the.
I never will. I'm all over the place.
Yeah, and I think that's the best way to be, because at that point you can discover so much cool shit. You know, I think everyone in the metal community has had a point in their life where all they wanted to hear was metal, and I've been there.
Me too.
And to an extent, I still am now, because at the end of the day, it is my favorite genre of music. So
Yeah.
it will be my go-to. But if I'm in the mood for something, you know, I pride myself in my ability to listen to something like Willie Nelson, NWA, and fucking Megadeth all in the same hour.
Yeah.
Because it's fun to cast off these shackles of feeling like you need to pledge allegiance to one thing,
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that is an important thing, but sometimes I think that there are different kinds. I think it's because you and I are active music listeners. So I think
Yes.
when people like us listen to other things, I think I give it more credit, because I feel like a lot of music fans are passive music fans, and they barely pay attention to what's going on. So when somebody
Yeah.
says to me, I listen to a little bit of everything, I'm like, well, no, you're telling me you don't listen to anything. It's on in the background while you're doing something else. Okay, fine.
That's become a big meme as of late on like Facebook and stuff. I've seen, it's people who say they listen to everything, and then it's like a bus coming towards a person, and the bus has like death metal written on it, and it's like
Yeah, but I mean, that's an interesting conversation to have while talking about The Real Thing, because The Real Thing is an album that takes a lot of different genre ideas and kind of puts them together. But Faith No More was already doing that prior to this album. This is obviously where they broke big. So just to jump in, since this is also my number one for 1989, when this album came out, I was obsessed with it. I was obsessed with Faith No More. Now, if I remember right, the first video from this album was from Out of Nowhere.
it was.
And it didn't make a dent over here, I don't think, because my memory starts with the video for Epic, which actually came out in 1990. So even though this is an 89 album, my relationship with it started in 1990. And I saw the video for Epic, and as quickly as I could went and bought the cassette of the album. And from that moment on, this was pretty much my favorite band. And I was so obsessed with them that I would tune in and video record all of their television performances. I remember they were on Arsenio Hall, and they were on the MTV Awards and shit like that. And I had all of those. I had a VHS that was literally meant for Faith No More television appearances, and don't have it anymore, unfortunately. But everything that came up with this band, I recorded it, and I would just watch them play, and I'd watch Mike Patton and him doing his antics. And the one thing that I loved is the different ways that he would do certain songs on TV, because you hear him do Epic, and when he gets to it's it, what is it? Sometimes he would be like, what is it? And other times he'd go, what is it? And I would always be like, what is he going to do this time? What weird thing is he going to throw in? And so he was absolutely mesmerizing to watch, still is today as a performer. But that was my beginning of my relationship with that dude. And I had no clue that he was as prolific as he would let everybody know very soon after this album. But,
for sure.
But yeah, this album hit a nerve with me big time. And I almost feel like it was so important because it felt like an album for outcasts. And I felt like an outcast. I have for the majority of my life. And this was an album that fortunately for me, I got on board with it before it really blew up. So I almost feel like I got to just go on the ride with these outcasts. Like they came into my life, and then all of a sudden a lot of people were into it, and I was like, yeah, these are my buds, Faith No More. It was and like we said before, they were a band that seemed to have a good sense of humor, and they seemed like dudes that were weird, but in a way that it made me want to go hang out with them. And I still feel that way today. But really, like, the last thing I'm going to say about this album, we've already talked about how I think it still sounds very unique today. But the big thing about The Real Thing for me, and why it's number one for me in '89, is because among all these other albums, which minus Acid Rain, because I didn't hear the Acid Rain album until several years later. But when it comes to albums that came out in 1989, this was the one that really opened my eyes to what can be done with rock and roll. You need to open your mind, dude. And I was that from that point on, I'm like, you know what? You're fucking right. Like, I'm not going to be limited to just one type of heavy music, because obviously there's all of these things out there. And so the real thing was that first album that opened that door for me.
Awesome. It really is a classic, you know.
Absolutely.
And I feel like Mike Patton himself is a fantastic vocalist and blows your mind, and he really has, you know, aged like a fine wine, because he just gets better and better, and there's more flavors there to his, you know.
Yeah.
If we were to list, you know, if we were ever going to do like a cranked and ranked Mike Patton, that shit would take us like 3 months, because the amount of projects that he's like lent himself to, you know, you wouldn't be able to fit it on one page.
Yeah. And also, he's like one of those people, I feel like, you know how like there's great actors that they get older and they just get so honed in on their craft and so fucking good. Yeah. I mean, a name that comes to mind is like maybe like Robert De Niro, or you could say somebody like that they've aged, and I feel like those dudes know how to do it. And I feel like that's Mike Patton. He's a guy that has always been really good at what he did, but as he's gotten older, it's almost like he's just effortlessly great at doing whatever he wants to do, and anything is believable with Mike Patton. And so just a quick side note, because earlier I was talking about why I didn't like Pretty Hate Machine, and it was this album. My brother's friend told me that Faith No More sucked, and I needed to listen to Nine Inch Nails. And I was
he was wrong.
Yeah, he was very wrong. So that's why it took me a little bit to get into Nine Inch Nails, because I was like, well, fuck that guy. And if those are Nine Inch Nails fans, fuck them too.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I've had to kind of divorce my mindset sometimes from, you know, having these associations with bands that were listened to by people I don't particularly like.
Yes.
And I feel like if someone doesn't shut up about a band and they're a dick about it, that makes you want to hate that band, even if it's not their fault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it works both ways. Like, I don't want to hear, I mean, I guess when it comes with negativity, like if you want to talk, like that's my whole persona on YouTube and in the world of me talking about music, is the fact that I'm going to have diarrhea of the mouth, as it was put to me in some comment. Some guy's comment in one of my videos quoted me as being low rent Zakk Wylde with diarrhea of the mouth. and I think it's true. But what I'm gonna be constantly talking about how much I love music, but I'm never gonna shit on somebody else's music. And I think that's the problem, is the fact that if you're gonna come at me with, you need to listen to this because that's bullshit, I'm like, nope. That last part is what made you completely irrelevant to me in your suggestion.
Yeah, you know, I will say on that note, there's a podcast that I've kind of binge listened, and it's called Your Favorite Band Sucks.
Yeah.
Where they pretty much roast any band ever. You know, no one is safe from their wrath. But
that's a little bit different, though. I feel like there's probably good-natured humor in that.
Oh, yeah. Regardless of how brutal it really is.
Because we could do that. Like, I mean, our favorite band, Metallica, we could probably do a whole podcast talking shit and making fun of aspects of that band.
He fucking left the band.
Jason's the future, Metallica's the past.
I'd love like an audio tape of like Lars Ulrich memorable quotes, because there's just so many great ones, and it's this like Danish American accent that just really makes it that much better.
I really enjoy doing a Lars Ulrich impression when I can really nail it, because I can't just do it and talk about whatever. I have to say a line that he said before.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's wrap this up by talking about some honorable mentions, because you and I both had the same problem where we had to leave out so many albums. I have a list of about 30 that ended up being whittled down to 5. And,
oh shit!
But I'm only going to talk about. I'm going to limit it to 5 honorable mentions. Do you want to? How many you got? Honorable mentions.
I've got 8.
Okay, you can go first. You just go through yours, and then I'll go through mine. Because you may talk about, if you talk about one of mine, I'm gonna stop you, and then we can just go from there.
I think there's going to be a few.
Probably.
Okay, so right off the bat, Alice in Hell by Annihilator.
Okay, that was not on my list at all.
That's such a good album, man. Where was that?
That is a band that has not connected with me. I like that album, and the one after it. Is it Never Neverland, the one after that?
Yeah.
But for some reason, that band is one that hasn't connected with me, where I know they're good, but they haven't clicked with me. And maybe one day I'll get around to it. That always happens. There's always that band where you're like, I hear something in that, and then something will happen 5 years down the line where you're like, where the fuck was I? And so I think Annihilator is probably one of those bands.
I've been there big time. But yeah, that makes me feel good, because there's a deep cut we'll do in another episode that I'm going to throw in there.
Cool.
From Annihilator, if that wasn't obvious enough. For fuck's sake. So next up, I've got Altars of Madness, Morbid Angel.
Oh, man, that is a good one. Shit, yeah.
And then Beneath the Remains, Sepultura.
That one's on my list.
I was going to say, that's got to be in there.
Yeah, it is, totally.
Bleach by Nirvana, which was in yours. Mm-hmm. Mother's Milk by Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yes, almost made my top 5.
Yeah?
It almost did. That is my favorite Chili Peppers album, and honestly, the last really great Chili Peppers album, in my opinion. But yeah, I love that fucking album. So that is one of mine too.
Yeah, I'm a first 5 albums guy with Red Hot Chili Peppers myself. So yeah, I would echo that. Include Blood Sugar Sex Magic. And
I like that one too, but it doesn't hit me as much as Mother's Milk does.
Oh yeah, too right. And then Skid Row.
Absolutely.
80s glam done exactly how it should be.
And it's, I wouldn't even call it glam. It is just hard rock music with an amazing vocalist. I love Sebastian Bach.
Killer pipes on that dude.
Yeah.
Here we go. Here is one. Now I've got to say something for this one. Slip of the tongue, Whitesnake.
All right. Okay. I don't even know if I remember what was the big single off of that one. Is This Love on that one, or is that the one before?
That's the one before.
Oh, okay.
This one was kind of the follow-up that didn't do as well, but it's the one with Steve Vai on it.
Does this Fool for Your Lovin' on that? I'll be a fool for your lovin' no more.
Yeah, that's the one.
All right.
That's the re-recorded version of that one.
I'm not a big fan of that band. That's a band that I need to try to dig into, because I know they even have 70s material that I don't know. And so one day I got to go and really give them a good listen, because I don't mind. I like that 80s shit, and I think Whitesnake seemed like a pretty fucking cool band. They wrote some cheesy songs, but some of those are brilliant cheesy songs.
I think Whitesnake are one of those bands that have done one of the biggest rebrands in history.
Absolutely.
Because, their first 6 albums, they would release a new blues rock album every year.
You did a video on them, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
I remember that. Everybody go subscribe to Eddie Sparxx and go watch his Whitesnake video. He if you want to learn about bands, I feel like I want Eddie to do a video for every band, because he does it in the most entertaining way, and I learned something at the end of the video. So I love it.
Oh well, thank you, man. I need to I need to do more of those retrospective ones. I've been making a few meme ones recently, where I'll take a clip from something and voice it over with clips of David Lee Roth being a fucking weirdo. But yeah, I've got I've got a new big video at the ready to launch in the next week. So
nice.
Watch this space, guys. Watch this space. But yeah, I just wanted to chime in and say, Judgment Day from Slip of the Tongue is a fucking awesome song. You need to listen to that one.
All right, I will.
And it has the best 80s gated snare sound ever recorded ever at exactly 3 minutes 7 seconds into the song, where they clearly just decided this one needs a little extra sauce, so they just turned the fucking reverb bus up to fucking 11 and it just gets this nice. Like sound. Oh, it blows me away every time. And my last honorable mention is Years of Decay by Overkill.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, that's a good one.
Potatoes!
Just jumping off of Overkill, one of mine would be Fabulous Disaster from Exodus.
Oh, yeah.
Amazing thrash metal album. So you named some of mine, so I'm going to go quickly here. An album that is really special to me and important, but I can't argue that it's not one of their best, is the album Presto from the band Rush, which came out in 1989. Rush is one of my favorite bands of all time, but Presto is low down on the list of albums for me, so it didn't make my list, but I love everything Rush put out. One that neither one of us talked about, which I think is really interesting, is Dr. Feelgood.
Shit.
We
Yeah,
we didn't
right.
include Dr. Feelgood, which is fine because you guys can go listen to our 2-part Motley Crue album ranking video or podcast, whatever it is, however you're taking this in, and hear us talk about Dr. Feelgood. But that's a fucking great 1989 album. On the same token, Cocked and Loaded by LA Guns is a fucking great album that came out in 1989. You mentioned Practice What You Preach, which is one of mine that I would have included. And it's really hard when it comes to hard rock albums and thrash albums, like I said, because there were so many of them. But yeah, it's really tough. But, Louder Than Love would have been one of mine as well. Same thing with Pretty Hate Machine. There's just so many great albums that came out in 1989 that it was really tough to narrow it down to 5 because it was a fucking fabulous year. Another honorable mention that I didn't include that's a little more out of the left field is the album Universe from the Canadian band Dead Brain Cells. It is progressive thrash a la Voivod, and it is a fucking amazing album, and that was an amazing band that I did a video on. One of my Bands You Should Know videos is on Dead Brain Cells. I think the first Bands You Should Know video I did was on them, which is on my YouTube channel. Go subscribe. So yeah, I'll kind of leave it there. Oh, Wake Me When It's Over by Faster Pussycat. There's a lot of fucking great albums. I'm looking at my list here and I'm all like, oh God, I didn't include that. And so this was a tough one, but I think we can wrap things up and send everybody home with the idea that 1989 was a killer year for music because there was so much amazing shit.
Yeah.
So there you go. Our top 5s of 1989. I'm sure we'll do this again. We'll probably have to pick. Maybe we should pick a year that is a little bit easier to narrow down next time. But this was fun. We'll have to do this again for another year. But anything you want to say to wrap this one up?
What I would say is, my favorite kind of time span in music would probably be about, 87 to round about 92. So everything in that chunk of time, there's a high possibility that I'll either own it or know it.
Yeah.
So,
for me, I would even tick that up 1 year and go to 93. But
oh yeah.
So, yeah.
I'd say that there is really reining it in, though. I think as a whole, my kind of decade of expertise would go from about 84 to 94. So you've got the big hair stuff, you've got the thrash stuff, but you've also got the whole grunge thing as well.
Yeah. So for me, the reason why 93 gets lumped in there is because that's when death metal was fucking huge.
Yeah.
And I was listening to a lot of death metal around that time. So I'm sure we'll talk about all of those years at some point. So yeah, thank you all for coming along with us on this trip down memory lane into 1989. Yeah, it was fun. So we'll be back again probably next week with another band discography ranking, and I'm thinking it's going to be somebody that maybe you're not quite expecting, because we have been hitting some biggies.
Yeah.
So far we did Nirvana, Motley Crue, and Slayer. And I think we're going to rein it in a little bit and talk about more of what I think both of us would consider an underrated band.
Most underrated band of all time, in my opinion.
Okay, but we're not going to say anything else. You're going to have to tune in next week. So yes, thank you for joining us for this edition of Cranked and Ranked. If subscribe to us on YouTube if you're not already, Eddie Sparxx and Old Head. Go watch our shit and join us next time. Thank you very much for listening. And Eddie, take us out.
Later, dude.